Okay, so this is all a repeat so far of last week's demo. So now I want to start with shaping a cylinder. A cylinder, although to you it seems like the end point, being able to pull a cylinder, in reality a cylinder is the blank form for many different things. So this cylinder, depending on what size it is, it could turn into all kinds of things like teapots or canisters or mugs or teacups, what else? Flower pots, not a bowl. A bowl's a different form. But anything that is generally kind of upright. A pitcher could be all of those things starting from this point. So what I want to show you today is how to make a basic vase that has a full base, a thin, somewhat thinned neck area, and then a flared rim. So that's what I'm going to start out by doing. And the first step in doing this is bellying out. And so bellying out means expanding the clay and getting a full area here. Actually, I'm just going to take away some of the excess clay that I didn't pull up into this pot because I stopped at the point I did. And if I were throwing, in my studio for the purpose of making a pot and using all of the possible clay that I could, I would have continued and gotten rid of all that excess clay that was down there. Okay, so bellying out. I have my sponge on the outside and I get my hand a little moist and put it inside the pot. And I can either use my sponge or not use my sponge, but what I'm going to do is press outward from the inside of the pot. Can you see the shape changing? Okay. So I'm creating a fullness by putting pressure, pushing out from the inside. And I can put a little counter pressure there with my sponge. All right? Now, the very first place to start doing this is to start with your hands and nothing else other than your sponge. And get the feeling of changing the clay with your fingers. Now later on, you can use one of these two ribs that we have that will give you a little more support on the outside so you can be more bold about what you're doing on the inside. So here is this wooden rib, and I'm going to bring that rib to the side of the pot at an angle. I don't want it straight up and down, I don't want it straight across because it will make lines. But if I put it at an angle, I can actually push into it and use that to help change the shape. And now my rib is here at like 3 o'clock on the clock face, but my eyes are watching here, which is closer to 12. So the reason for doing that is I'm looking at what I have done and adjusting the motions of my hand on the inside according to what I'm seeing there at 12 o'clock. Right? So that's another way. That's step number 2. And finally, the more advanced way to do this is to use your sheet metal rib. And the beauty of that is that it can bend and it can shape to what you want the pot to be. And so now I can bring this sheet metal rib and I can throw right into that shape that I'm making with it. And it will give me an even more distinct shape. So you should learn those 3 ways to do this. Get comfortable with the 3 tools, your hand and the 2 different ribs. And then what happens is that you use the appropriate tool to the situation you're in as you go along. All right, so we made a great big fat belly there, didn't we? What we also did, I'm going to get some water out of here. What we're also doing here is something that you might not think of right away. We're changing the direction of the clay. So it was going straight up and down here at first, right? So then we changed its direction going outward. And then we also changed its direction back going inward. And the changes of direction in the walls of a pot are what give a pot visual interest. And so that's really how you give character to things. And a little later we'll look at some pots and talk about where we've changed directions. All right, so the next maneuver here now to make this into this vase shape that I was talking about is to collar in. So collaring in means squeezing inward, and here I'm using my two hands. Depending on the sturdiness of what I'm working with, I can either use my whole hand, or I can get in what's called a 6-finger hold, which is my two middle finger, the front parts of them, and my index fingers and thumbs, and do the same thing. So if I have a sturdy piece of clay like I have here, my two hands are fine, the whole hand. And if I have something really delicate, like say the top of a bottle, I probably want to use this 6-point hold. All right, so what I have done is to squeeze the clay in, right? So now I have accentuated that change of direction. Now when I squeeze in, I don't want to try to, if I wanted this to be really thin at the neck, I wouldn't push it all in at once. I would only push it in a little bit at a time. And when I do that, it's really ideal to go all the way up the clay and on, okay? So you want to play around with that a little bit and just get the feeling of it. Now, of course, pots and demos can collapse at any time. That's part of doing demos. But what I have to be careful of here so that this doesn't collapse is that I didn't get this part too weak. So that's going to happen to you when you try to do this the first few times. Maybe 1 out of 3 will you'll get to this point and it'll collapse. This part will fall down inside the other. And that is because this shoulder area right here, can you see how this might be considered a shoulder? That has gotten too weak. So as you go along, you learn how to keep it strong enough so that it doesn't collapse. And that's just a matter of having your hands on the clay and getting the feel for it. All right, so I think this will come in just a little bit more. So that's really a wild change of direction, isn't it? So now I'm going to do the final change of direction, which is I'm going to flare the rim. And when I collared this in, or when I first of all, when I bellied this out, the clay got thinner where I bellied it out, right? So that's why I'm worried about it being too thin and collapsing on the shoulder. So when I came in, the clay got thicker because it was more clay occupying less space. So it's quite thick now. So I actually have enough clay that I could actually pull this some more. And this is an odd feeling to you at first to start pulling in the middle of a pot. But you can do that, and you will do that a lot. So see, I've made that thinner. And as I've been pulling it up, I've been letting it flare out just a little bit. But if I want to finish that feeling of flaring, I actually put my sponge here, and now my left hand is going to take over, and I'm going to actually work as if I were making a bowl right there at the top by pushing outward with my left hand. And so there we have a vase. If I was really concerned about how well it looked on the inside here of the rim, I could use this straight rib and actually just kind of run that rib down in there and get rid of any kinds of slurry or marks from my fingers. And there's a vase. I'm just going to get down in here and get rid of the water that's down in the bottom. And may I borrow your wood tool here for a minute, kind of? Sure. I'm actually going to cut away some of the excess clay at the bottom so you can see the final shape of what the vase will look like. So there is the vase shape. And you can see that it's a lot more interesting, not that it's any kind of a work of art, but it's a lot more interesting visually than that cylinder that I started with, right? Also, it now has a function, a defined function. It is a vase.